A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
On a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian Lobby, check on the political agenda for the week ahead. Michelle Pearse is the CEO of the ACL, and back with us. Michelle, welcome back.
Great to be with you again, Neil.
Michelle, let's turn our attention to Western Australia. As a starter today, there's some significant things that have happened. Of course, they had a state election on Saturday. What's your thoughts here? Because a comfortable victory again for the Labor Party over the Liberals and the Nationals in Western Australia. What's your reflection on what's happened in WA?
Yeah, I think that Labor won by more than many had expected. We actually did see a massive swing away from Labor, 18% in fact at this point, but only a 7% swing towards the Libs. And that remainder of, the swing away from the Labor and to these other parties was a mixture of Libs, but then also there was a swing towards the Greens, a 4% swing at this point, but also to One Nation and the Australian Christians. So the result at this point, we've still got 9 undecided seats, but in the lower house, 41 to Labor, 5 to Libs and 4 to Nationals. So really this went beyond what the Libs even expected. They thought they would win a few more seats, but certainly a comfortable victory for Roger Cook.
Well, Labor remains completely dominant in Western Australia, and being a Western Australian girl yourself, I wonder whether you've got a bit of a reflection here, because going back to the previous election, such a trouncing of the Conservative side, because there was really no backbone at all. And I imagine it's a long way to fight your way back if you find a little bit of backbone. And I'm wondering whether you've got any thoughts here as to a new formation of the Liberals and the Nationals working together. Any thoughts there on the Conservative side of politics in WA?
Yeah, that's right. I'm from Western Australia, so certainly have a vested interest over there. But you're right, in the last election there was almost a complete wipeout with only 2 Libs and 4 Nats in the lower house. So they've made up a little bit of ground, but it is difficult to establish yourself as a force to be reckoned with such few numbers. So they need to be making some really strong stands to even be noticed as a viable opposition in Western Australia. And I know that we've got some great new members in the upper house, so hopefully they'll bring some gusto to the party. Libby Metten, the opposition leader, who I'm not sure if she's going to last in that position now, but she did make some good commitments in terms of repealing self-sex ID laws that Labor had pushed through, and also banning puberty blockers for children. So we think Libs need to lean more into these sorts of decisions. The threat now with the Labor government with such a strong mandate to lead means that they could push through pretty much anything. And our advice certainly to Labor would be, don't go down that route. It will lose them popularity if they push too much into the woke agenda. But they've got conversion therapy law on the horizon that will probably be tabled very soon. And what they're considering is currently worse than Victoria. So that will stifle religious freedom and the ability just to help people struggling with their sexuality and with their gender issues. And also there's been long-time threats for changes to the Equal Opportunities Act there as well, which could threaten the viability of Christian schools to continue to operate according to their ethos. So our encouragement to Libs and Nationals certainly would be to make a strong stand against these laws, to stand for religious freedom and not be weakened further just simply because they don't have the numbers, but actually use their small numbers to put forward a strong message.
That'll be the challenge, won't it, for Liberals and Nationals in WA to find a place where they can argue against the woke agenda of the ALP, because, as you say, tough times ahead and threats to religious freedom that come from all of those sorts of things you're talking about there. Hey, but before we leave the WA focus here for a few moments, some good news that appears to be coming to pass, and they've been working for so long, the Australian Christians in Western Australia, and it's looking like, and let's hope our hopes are not dashed here, but it's looking like Marika Groenewald, who leads the Australian Christians, may be set for a seat in the upper house, the Legislative Council. Any thoughts from you on that? That's a huge breakthrough, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And Australian Christians is fundamentally building their platform on pro-life values and on religious freedom. So they'll certainly uphold the things that we advocate on in the upper house. Unfortunately, looks like a Labor Greens majority at this point, but Australian Christians certainly got one seat on first preference. And once they count all the second preferences and so on, they could get a second seat in there as well. So that, along with a couple of really good Christian Liberal members, could, at least be a conscience in the upper house. At least push back publicly on perhaps some of the bills within the upper house that threaten religious freedom. So that's good news for Australian Christians. I'm sure they would have preferred to have the balance of power. But as it is, at least they're there having a voice, and that's really important.
And I think all eyes might be on whether Mike Crichton will join Marika as a member in that Legislative Council, the upper house in Western Australia. Certainly having a voice from an elected member, that becomes a little more powerful than just being somewhere on the outer, which is what the Australian Christians have been, on the outer. But now they're going to have, the likelihood is, they're going to have a voice within the WA Parliament, and that's going to be a pretty powerful voice, no doubt.
That's right, and they'll have staffing, they'll have more resources allocated to them, so certainly more capacity, capability to build up their base and be that strong voice for Christians in the upper house.
Okay, huge win again for the ALP in Western Australia. Let's turn our attention to what that might mean for the timing of a federal election. I mean, Albo was apparently poised to call the federal election on the weekend, but, decided that the tropical cyclone Alfred fallout was more important than calling an election, and he'll have his reasons for that. But no doubt he was interested to see what was going to be coming out of the Western Australian state election results as well. What are your thoughts here, Michelle, about timing now for a federal election?
Yeah, we were also gearing up for April 12 election, and on the back of Labor's win, I think it would have been in Albanese's favour, to call it today. But so be it. He's chosen, as you said, to focus on what's happening in Queensland. So it will be one of the 3 first Saturdays in May. That's when it's very likely, well, it will actually be. There's no other weekend in April that's possible. So we're continuing to push our message out there. We've got mass letterbox drops. We've got billboards, social media campaigns. We're targeting marginal seats and preparing resources for Christians. So we want to make sure that Christians are the most informed they've ever been in the lead up to a federal election, and also just some advice on how to vote to ensure that the Greens we don't have the situation like in WA where they have the balance of power. So we'll be providing advice on that as well. And we are strongly against what the Greens are pushing for. They want to eliminate religious freedom or any kind of proselytising opportunity in the public square. So this is a real threat, and if they have a Labor Greens power sharing arrangement, or if they hold balanced power in the Senate, it's bad news for Australia. So our resources will certainly be advocating against the Greens policies, but also giving advice in terms of what that looks like when you go to fill in your ballot paper.
I guess it depends on who you are listening to, but it would appear that the most likely outcome for the next election, unless there is some sort of landslide to Peter Dutton, that there will likely be a ALP, Greens and even Teal's power sharing arrangement for our federal government. That would be... How would that look for the Christian social agenda and the sorts of things we keep talking about as being very important, the threats that it brings to families and freedoms? How would that look if that is the actual end result, do you think?
Well, it's, trying to consider prayerfully what the future may look like and what we need to be prepared for. There's one, I'm considering that perhaps things may get worse before they get better, and that perhaps they need to for a bit of a wake-up call across Australia. And that might mean more censorship or attacks on religious freedoms and on Christian schools and on Christian charities. It could look like that, but I really don't believe that it's going to be a long-term thing. I think that will follow eventually from what's happening in the US with the strengthening of freedoms and reversing the damage that woke has done. So, I mean, with the Labor-Greens power-sharing arrangement, we could be in for a rough few years. But if it was just Labor without Greens, I think we have a little more hope of trying to convince Labor to come to more of a central position, seeing the way that culture is going at the moment. But who knows? We do our best to speculate. We could be prepared for the worst, but also don't lose hope.
Yeah, and I know that there'll be a lot of listeners heartened to hear your sentiments there, expecting that the battle could even get harder. So that's a challenge, and certainly for supporters of the Australian Christian lobby, that's something to be very aware of in the lead up to the federal election. Hey, let's turn our attention to Sydney for a few moments. Of course, the Sydney Mardi Gras was on recently, and now the Australian Christian lobby, you are calling for defunding of the Sydney Mardi Gras following a provocative display that openly mocked Jesus. What actually happened?
Yeah, well, so a photo has been circulating online as somebody dressed up as a queer Jesus. I mean, talk about making the sacred profane. It's just disgusting. There's no words to describe it. But then they had, there was a Aboriginal man dressed as a sort of like in what looked like stripper clothes with a spear, pointing his spear into the side of Jesus. And we all know what that was depicting. Just completely offensive and out of touch with not only what Christians would see as an offence, but just any reasonable Christian, reasonable person, any person that's not even of faith would find this offensive. And now you've got that, but you've also got this parade that celebrates pride in sexuality, sexual perversity. And we know that sex without boundaries or this kind of perversity does lead to harm in our society. This sort of way that they go about celebrating sexuality, it harms families, it harms children, it harms yourself. And we see Albanese out there on the front of this parade, at the front with his girlfriend, celebrating along with everybody else at the parade, this sexual pride. Now, as a parade that's supposed to be inclusive and tolerant, to not come out and apologise for this image that has been circulating is completely unacceptable. And so at ACL we're thinking, well, what do we call for here? And I think the issue is that this is being funded by New South Wales government and funded by the City of Sydney, with millions of dollars being poured in by taxpayers and by ratepayers. And I don't think that the everyday Australian is happy with that. And so we're calling for it to be defunded. The New South Wales government is complicit with the mockery, the religious mockery. The City of Sydney is complicit with it as long as they continue to fund it. But like I said, not only the religious mockery, but the celebration of perversity that leads to harm in our society.
And interesting to draw attention to the fact that, especially for New South Wales listeners to our conversation today, your tax dollars, your ratepayer dollars are actually funding what, as you describe here, Michelle, ridicules the deeply held beliefs of millions of Australians. And when we use that word, and we don't often talk about it, but blasphemy, it is a blasphemous thing to have an Aboriginal stripper at the Mardi Gras pointing the spear at as you say, a gay-looking Jesus. And that's very, very challenging. What it does do, I mean, if we are shocked by that, and let's assume that listeners to our conversation today are as shocked as you and I are, really it actually does draw attention. It might even rile a few people and ruffle a few feathers that make you want to bring the biblical meaning of Christ being crucified ahead of Easter into the light. I mean, this might well stir a few people to actually be part of, how we might declare the true biblical meaning of Christ crucified. Any thoughts from you here, Michelle?
And that's what I take encouragement from. So thank you for saying that, because our media release, we put in scripture and we put in the true meaning of why Jesus died on the cross and that he offers grace and forgiveness to anybody that will repent and turn from their sin. And that media release was published in two news forums that are widespread, that we hope would have reached millions. And so what the enemy could have used for evil, God's turned around for good in allowing the proclamation of the gospel. We quoted from Isaiah, and I just hope that reached people more so than this blasphemous image did. So yes, we can take advantage of these moments where they try to mock Jesus and turn it into an opportunity to glorify him and continue to spread the gospel. And that's what's such an advantage and a benefit of Christians in the public square, that we get to take these sorts of things that are meant for evil and turn them around to a public message of God's goodness.
Well, you could be having the attitude of you could be offended and you could be in some ways wounded by the thought of there being a blasphemy like that, but you could also then turn that around, turn your attitude to, well, how am I going to promote the true message of the Christ crucifixion just ahead of Easter, as Easter is on its way. Turn around the emotion into something good. Hey, let's stay with New South Wales for a few moments. The New South Wales abortion bill, and you're encouraging a letter-writing campaign. What's the latest here?
Yes, that's right. So again, the Greens want to increase access to abortion. Well, we think if abortion is already up to birth, then how could they increase the access? Well, they want to increase the access in geographical areas. Now, the reason why abortion isn't so prominent in these regional areas is because there's not enough doctors to perform them. So doctors go into healthcare and midwives to save life, not to destroy it. And so this is the New South Wales Greens attempt to increase the access to abortion. And they can only do this by putting pressure on conscientious objectors. So these are people who don't want to perform abortions, who would rather not be involved in the process, not only Christians, but many doctors and nurses. And so they want to remove any kind of red tape. At the moment, doctors have to refer to a online New South Wales Department of Health phone line. But now they want to refer patients, or now the Greens want them to refer patients directly to abortion providers themselves. So just a quicker route to get to that abortion service. But also another really dangerous part of this bill is they want to allow or give the New South Wales Health Minister powers to make directives to public hospitals to perform abortions. Now, the real danger here is for Catholic hospitals who receive public funding, and Calvary is not too far from our memory here in the ACT, where they took over the Calvary Hospital. And the reason being, and this was in the parliamentary report, was that they didn't provide the full range of women's health services. And we know by that they mean abortions. And so it is so inconvenient for those who love abortion to have hospitals who refuse to participate. So this law would give the New South Wales Health Minister, as happened in ACT, the power to simply take over these hospitals because they're not providing the full range of services. This wasn't recommended by the New South Wales Review into Abortion Services. This is a Greens idea, nothing that's come from the New South Wales government themselves, and so we're calling on them to reject this legislation. They've got the grounds to. This isn't a pro-life or pro-choice bill. This is about freedom, conscientious objectors, and also about ensuring that Catholic hospitals can continue to operate according to their standards and their ethos. So we're calling on all people in New South Wales that are listening to this to write to their local MP to ensure that they know that that the public knows about this and are opposing it. And at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're standing up for the unborn child, for the vulnerable child in their mother's womb. That, at the end of the day, more access to abortion means more babies that will be murdered, and we've got to continue to stand against that.
There's a letter-writing campaign and acl.org.au to find out more about that. Just very, very quickly, time's running out, but in Victoria, the anti-vilification bill, there was debate last week and things seem to have stalled. Is there a little update on what's happened in Victoria around that?
Yeah, so they pulled it on Thursday night. We think it's because they haven't come to an agreement with the LNP or the Greens. So the best case scenario would be that that the LNP and Greens don't budge and they continue not to come to an agreement so that the bill doesn't pass. Now, what's the most dangerous thing about this bill is we all know what's happening with Lyle Shelton up in Queensland, because he said drag queens are dangerous role models for children. His defence is on a reasonable person defence, that a reasonable person wouldn't find what Lyle said offensive. But in this legislation, the reasonable person test is not on just an everyday Aussie, but on the person with the protected attribute themselves. So if a drag queen found this offensive, then that's what Lyle, if he was in Victoria and this bill had passed, would have to try to defend, which is really impossible. And also, this lifts the penalty from civil to criminal. So instead of just a fine, this could be jail time. So this is really serious. If you're in Victoria, you haven't written to your local member yet, please do so today. But Christians across Australia, we really need to pray that this bill doesn't pass, because it's going to strip our freedom to be able to speak up against the moral evils of our day.
Wow, okay, and from my understanding, it would add an entirely new branch of crimes in Victoria, and there's also some doubt as to whether the police would be able to even keep up with that. And I know there's challenges, numbers of police in Victoria too. That's a big challenge. Hey, for listeners to follow through and get some more details to keep up with the state of play in things that are going on around our nation, you can visit the Australian Christian Lobby website, acl.org.au, acl.org.au. And as Michelle said a little earlier in our conversation, there's going to be all sorts of campaigns happening in various seats all around Australia with the upcoming federal election. And to be a part of that, and no doubt, Michelle, you've still got a sort of a standing army that will be out working in electorates, and no doubt there's some sort of a fighting fund that you'll be trying to raise to be able to make things happen there. For listeners, acl.org.au. You can hear the state of how things are around the nation and the need for that level of support. acl.org.au. Michelle Pearse, thanks so much for joining us once again today on 2020.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.